Hello and welcome back to our series on learning Google App Scripts for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared and in empowering our fellow HR professionals in really rethinking how we are delivering our HR services and solutions by using tools we probably already have at our disposal. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions, and I would like to finish up with our alerts. You'll remember that where we left off in that last video is we created our instruction box here that pops up on our user interface of our Google Sheet, and it has our instructions. And then what we did was we created a div that by default is set at none, which means it's not visible and it doesn't take up any space. But then we were able to toggle that div or populate it with information. But you'll notice that once it's on, there really is no way to shut it off unless we run that code again. Like we can go in here and um, type in 83, which doesn't exist. And then when we hit process, it doesn't really go away. So we could essentially run that function again to set this to none, but that's going to take a lot of times of calling that function. What we could do instead is utilize something called set timeout, which runs a set amount of time. And then once that time finishes, like if it's 5 seconds, then it'll run a block of code saying set it to none. That way we can take care of that in just one swoop, have it run for 5 seconds regardless, and then set itself to none, essentially hide itself. And then the other thing that I would like to do in this video is really tackle this found piece. So what is actually occurring with this is, let's go over to our code. What's occurring is it's calling this function, not that function, it's calling this retrieve data function. And then it's doing its code. It's checking to see if that employee number exists. If it does, if it's coming back as something other than -1, then it's returning that line of that row of data. If it's not found, if it is 1, then it's returning this. And what's happening is this is getting sent over to our HTML side. Our HTML side is assuming that it is essentially an array. And then it's breaking up that array just like we're wanting it to by index. And then it's populating the index into the appropriate cell. So we don't want that. What we would rather have is if it's not found, then we just do an alert up here saying it's not found. Please try again, or do something else. But then we don't want it to populate this. So we can write a simple if statement. If the return value, if it's returned as a string not found, then run that function, populate it. Or if it is found, then just continue on. So we can do that with an if statement. Then I also want to get rid of this toggle bar. So we'll take care of that real quick. And then the last thing we would have to do on this create, read, update, delete user interface is to take care of this formatting. So we'll get into that as soon as we get done with these alerts here. So let's go back over to our code. And let's actually take care of this button first, because that's the easiest thing. We'll just get rid of it. As soon as I find our button, there it is. We don't need this toggle button anymore. And what I did was I took these variables that we had up here. These variables were down here, but since they're inside a function, they're local to that function, which means only this function could see it. So what I did was I took it and made it a global variable, just like we did with our code.gs file, to where no matter what function it is, they can still use these variables here. So now let's work on that set timeout. So we want our set timeout to run within our notification toggle function. And we don't want it to run as part of this if statement. We want it to run after the if statement outside of the if statement. So we put it down here right before the very last curly bracket. And the way a set timeout runs, again, it just runs an amount of time. And then once that time elapses, it runs a block of code. So we can start by set timeout. Now, what set timeout takes inside its method parentheses is essentially a function. And that function is going to set the notification box style display to none. So we can actually just copy this so we don't have to retype it. And how it's going to do that, it's not just going to do this immediately. It is actually going to do it after a set amount of time. So in the curly bracket, or after that curly bracket of the set time out function, we need to give it an amount of time. So the way JavaScript and Google Apps Script, actually a lot of coding languages run or handle time, is it doesn't handle it as the way that we think, hours, seconds, minutes, or whatever, because we know that unit of time equals something. So instead of having to define that, JavaScript, Google Apps Script defaults to milliseconds. So it thinks of time in the form of milliseconds. So let me make a comment here. Run function after set time in milliseconds. So 5 seconds is 5,000 milliseconds. Ooh, spelled that horribly wrong. There we go. So if we were to just put 5 here, and then we go and run this, it will pop up. It'll set it to block. But the problem is within 5 milliseconds, like a blink of an eye, it's going to set it to none. So we want it to be a little bit longer than that at least. So we'll set it to 5,000 milliseconds, which is equal to 5 seconds in our brains. And what we can do is now save this and then go back to our sheet, give it a go. And what we should see is when we set this to process, it's going to pop up as unavailable, but within 5 seconds, it should go away. And perfect. It sure does. Now, when we're thinking about how long we should make it, if you are noticing that it is disappearing way too quick before a reasonable person could read the notification, then that's not good. You got to make it longer. And on the flip side, if you realize that it is just painfully and uncomfortably hanging out there after people are reading and then they're getting done with everything that they're doing and it's still there, you need to shorten it. I found that 5 seconds is a reasonable amount of time to read 2 lines of information. So we'll leave it at 5 seconds, but please adjust that as you need. So let's go back to our code and actually start working with some of our notifications. So I'm not going to have y'all read. I'm not going to have you guys sit here and wait for me to get done with all of my notifications. But what we can do is unavailable, please select a process action. There we go. What I do want to do is come down here and start tackling that not found thing. We can first get rid of this. And when we go back over here to our code, we know that it's either going to return this or this. And what we want to check in an if statement is if it returned this string right here, we want it to just populate an alert. If it doesn't, if it returns this or anything other than not found, then we just want it to run the normal code. So we can do that by burying this into our code. Now, we don't want to put it up here because what this is saying is from our HTML side, we want to run a Google Apps script. And the Google Apps script we want to run is called this, and we want to pass this variable, which is this, to that. Now, the code is going to be running over there on the Google Apps script side, and then it's going to return something that is going to be ran by this function. And what it's returning, we called employee data. So really what we're wanting to check is that employee data. So we want it in this function here. So what we want to do is if emp data is strictly equal to not found, then we want to run a chunk of code. That chunk of code we want to run is the same as this because we want to produce a notification. And we don't want it to be this. What we want it to be is employee. We want it to be employee number, not found. And we'll just do it that way. And we don't need an exclamation point. And then we can run the notification. And then we want to set an else. And we want to include our normal code. And then we're going to need to close out that curly bracket. And then what we'll do is we'll indent this to make sure it is aware that it is part of our code here. Okay, good. So now when we do this, it should, instead of trying to break up not found, it's going to stop because it found that it's not found. Sorry, that didn't make sense. It's going to find that the return value is equal to not found. And it's just going to run this block of code. If it comes back with data, then it's going to run all of this. So let's go ahead and try this out. Okay, so now if we select something that we know doesn't exist, I say 83, we go to retrieve record, it should populate that it's not found up here and not trying to break it up down here. Employee number not found, not populating down here, and that should go away. Perfect. So it works good. One thing that I do want to mention though is when you're doing set timeouts, if you try to cram too much in there, you can actually create a situation to where you are canceling something before you're wanting to. And what I mean by that is say we want to go up here and do another notification. You can get so notification happy that you can actually work against yourself. So let's do this as processing. So what we're wanting is the second that we hit this retrieve record process button, it's going to run this, it's going to store this in a variable, and then it's going to give us a little notification in that block saying processing. And then it's going to show that because it's set by default to none. And then we're wanting it to run this script. And then if it's not found, if it comes back as not found, then we want to populate this value. So what's actually happening here is this is running, waiting 5 seconds. While that 5 seconds is going, it's running all of this. It does not take 5 seconds to run this code, maybe a second tops. So what's going to end up happening is this is going to run, it's going to show it. And then while it's showing it, it's going to run this. It's going to change the notification value to employee number not found, but this is still running. And And what's going to end up happening is this is going to populate. This is going to populate, but it's going to be immediately shut off to none. Because remember here, it's set to block to show. And our if statement up here to toggle it back and forward is checking to see if it's blocked, and then it's going to set to none. So let's save this, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So let's pick 83 again. And then we want to retrieve that. We hit process. There it is. It's processing. And then you'll notice that that goes away without firing the other piece, because although it changed the text was changed and then it was immediately set to none. So that's not helpful. And there's a couple ways that we can address this. One is you just ensure that you're not getting too happy with the alerts. And if you think about this, what we just created works the same exact way as a spinner function. So, when you go to a website and you click on something and then it gives that little circle, that spinner saying I'm loading or I'm trying to do something, it works the same exact way. It's either working on a timeout or it's simply just shutting off and setting its display to none once that function is done. So what we could do is we could build in here something along the lines of this. We could just grab this and put it in here. If you're really, really stuck on having this processing thing done, we could just reset it to none prior to this if statement. So we could just do it that way and force it to be set at none and then, change it. Let's see how that works. So we'll refresh it and then we hit 83. And then what'll happen is it'll run the instructions that we did in the order that we wanted it to. And then it'll close it, and then employee number not found. And then it'll close out after 5 seconds. So we could do it that way. Or we could just write a separate function that handles the processing one, or as opposed to the results one. We could do it that way. So there's a couple ways that we can do it. For now, we will just leave it this way because it didn't seem to run, it wasn't that bad. But yeah, we'll just leave it that way. So now the next thing that I want us to do is I want us to focus on this formatting here. So in our sheet, anytime, we'll just use 83, anytime that we send information over and create a new record, it comes over as the field type determines. So what I mean by that is our employee number field here, the type is a number, so it's coming over as a number. And then the last name is a text. The hire date, our hire date is actually DOH. Our date of hire is a text. But what happens is inside Google Sheets, Google Sheet by default is set to a format of automatic, which means Google Sheets will try to figure out what type of data the user is trying to put in there. And sometimes it comes across as, sometimes it gets it right, and other times it doesn't. So I'll show you what I mean. Let's go over here and finish creating this. Let's put Bob Robertson in facilities. And the job title, let's make structural technician, I suppose. It works. We pay them $65,000. This is 2024, and we'll say this is a new hire. So now let's create this. And I'll go through and put alerts in here and give you the code templates. But notice how this 83 is misaligned. That's showing that it's a different format. And then the same thing with our salary, and then the same thing with our date of hire. So if we go in here and just click on Robinson up here in format, you'll see it's automatic. If you go up here to employee number, it's automatic. It came over as a number. But if we go into 80 and type in 83 and then try to retrieve that record immediately, it's going to come up as not found. The reason it's not found is because it's looking for, it's essentially looking for plain text. Like if we go in here and change this to a number and then move it over, and then we try to process it again, it's going to come up as not found because it's looking for a string. It's looking for plain text. So now if we change this to plain text, and then now try and pull it, it's still not going to find it. And the reason it's not going to find it is because this right here doesn't have a format. It has no clue what this is supposed to be. The same with this date over here. It doesn't have a format. So what we need to do is we really, really want to be able to submit a record and then be able to pull that record immediately. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set this. We're going to have to set this format. And employee number, we don't really need as a number. We can have that as plain text, so it'll pull. That's fine. Because see, if we go over here and do, say, 87, then it's pulling it. And if you noticed, when we pulled 83, it didn't give us not found because it found 83. It just couldn't read the rest of the file because that and the other date doesn't have a format. It has no clue what it is. So we could go through and set the whole page. Could do a function or a line of instructions to format the entire page as plain text. But we really would like this salary to remain a number. Because even if this is a number, if we go over here and set this to a number, see, we set that to a number, and then we hit 87, you'll notice that it's still populating, which is fine because it has a format. The two dates are throwing it off. And we want this salary to be a number because we want to be able to do some sort of calculation within our UI later on. And we can't do a numerical calculation on a string. It has to be a number. So to do that, we can set each individual column or each individual cell, format individually, which is a lot of code, or we can just we can get this and then use the array to set the formats individually, which is only going to be one line of code. So I'm going to show you both ways. And first, I'm going to show you how to actually get the type. And we'll start by getting the type of this because according to Google, it doesn't have a type. So what we'll do is we'll come up here and grab B23. And to do this, to show this illustration, I would like to just create a new function, a new temporary function. We'll call this function test. And inside this test, we want to call on our sheet and we want to get the range. Now, anytime that we create a record, it is appending the row, which means it's taking that data and putting it at the very last row. So we could actually get the last row. So when we're thinking of that, we want to start at the last row. So to get the last row, we simply can identify the sheet, get last row, and then, no, not curly brackets. There we go. And then we want to start at the first column. The number of rows, we can use an integer there because we only want one row. But then when we get to the columns, we don't want to use an integer. What we can do is use get last column. So now what I want to do is I want to get the values of this. And then what we'll do is we will do let sheet test equal that. Now let's save this and then select the test function and run it. Okay, we ran it, but we got to log it. My mistake. And then let's log this sheet test out and see how it comes to us. It's going to come to us in a two-dimensional array. If you remember, this is a two-dimensional array, and it only has a 0 index initially, and then, was that 11? Well, 10 indexes, I guess. Yep, 10 indexes because it starts at 0. And what we're wanting is 0, 1. So let's do another log. Logger log sheet test. And if we do 0 and 1, it is going to give us that date. And it's the date as Google App Script does it. So it is local time. It is the day of the week, month, day, time zone, and then year. So nobody really thinks like that in the real world. I don't know. I can't say that. Sorry, that was a broad brush. Maybe there are people out here that think like that. Typically, I don't. So I would like to essentially change this format. One, to plain text. So one, it's a little bit easier to read, and we can change the date, but ultimately we're focusing on the format. So let's see what kind of format that actually is. So let's create another variable. Let bcell equal sheet test. Oops, correction. Let's do, sheet test 0. We'll go over, and this is going to be 1. Now let's call this bcell and figure out actually what type of format it is. So there's a way that we can check format, and if we just log, we can hit type of, and then we put our variable in here. And if that is strictly equal to, say, number, then it's going to return true. So let's run that and then see what happens. It's going to come back as false. So we can go back here and change string. And this is just a way to check how it's coming to you. That's also false. So we really have no idea what type this is. And we already know that it's not assigned format, but let's just go in and see if we can get the number format. So let's do logger log, and let's do B cell. And what we want to do in B cell is, oh, we can't do this in logger. My mistake. Let's create another variable here. And this one is, let's create a variable B cell form. And B cell form is going to be B cell get, it's not going to let me do it with the format. So what we'll do is we will create this as sheet get range. And we could do the numeric ways that we were trying it, or there's a simple way, since we've been, I don't want to confuse too much, but we've been doing row 1 or row 23 is row 23. I'll just keep it this way. I'll show you a shortcut later. So this is going to be 23, and we are going to start at, so this is going to be 23, and we want this one. So it's starting at row 23, column 2. So if we go over here and start typing in get range 23, 2, and then what we want to do is get values, value, because there's only one, and then we can go in here and do get form is B cell form dot get, instead of the value, let's just do this. Instead of getting the value, let's do get number format. And then we can just log the B cell form. Okay, so now what we're doing is instead of getting the values, we're just simply getting the number format, because the reason why it wasn't letting me populate this up here was because we were already getting the values of it. So we couldn't continue on getting the values and then getting the number. We had to do one or the other. So now let's run this. Now, when it gives a value, it's not going to be very clear. It's not going to say, it wouldn't say something along the lines of, I'm a string or I'm a number. It does something a little bit different. So let's find a number. And a number was on our H. So we could actually go over 23 and then let's figure out what this is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we can go over here and change this 2 to an 8. Now it's set as automatic, but when we run this, it's set as automatic, but it's indicating that it is a number. So that's good. So we're pulling it up as a number, but that initial one is, it just doesn't know. It doesn't have anything set. So what we're wanting to do right now is set the format. So now to set the format, it is a lot like setting a value, except we're not essentially setting the value. We're just simply setting the number format. So what I want to show is we can do B cell. Well, actually, no, let's just do the whole sheet test. So let's go down here. Let's verify first that this is set a little wonky. Yep, it's still formatted all crazy. So what we can do is actually sheet test. And instead of setting the value, no, we're using this get value thing. we can erase this, and then we'll comment all of this out. Because we're not getting a value here. You can't set the number format if you're setting the value. So what we can do is set number format. In this case, it's going to be number formats. And the number formats, if you remember, it's coming to us as a two-dimensional array. So we can use that two-dimensional array to set individual elements within that array, certain formats, while others are different. So what we can do is let's create it like this. And remember, it's a two-dimensional array. So inside that two-dimensional array, we want to set initially this column, which is index 0, this column, this column, this column, this column, this column, and this column, all plain text. So if you think about plain text, there's no real way within JavaScript. Plain text is not a type. Plain text is a subtype, I guess you could call it. But really, the types of data or variables that come through JavaScript are, Boolean, string, number. There is no plain text, but there is a way to set plain text by setting it like that. So this ampersand in quotation marks is telling the set number format to set it as plain text. Now we need to do this 7 times. So we can just copy this and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is the 0 index. So when we do this, this here is the 0 index, this ampersand, which is indicating to set the number formats to plain text. And this ampersand, this initial index, is set to our index 0 of this array, or in this case, that first column. And then the next one is set at this one. So we would have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we want to ensure that we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this next one, we want to be a number. So the way that we would do a number, and ideally we would like it taken out to 2 decimal places. So how we would do that is instead of an ampersand, we would just do 0 point. Well, actually, we would also need the comma, and then we would want 0.00, because that's the format that we're wanting our numbers. And then we would want, how many more? So we would need 3 more ampersands. And then what we would have here is when we ran this, get rid of this log. When we ran this, what would happen is I'll run this real quick and then I'll jump back over to our sheet, because all this should then be formatted correctly and we will be able to use 83. So let's save this, and then we'll jump back over here, and as you can see, everything was adjusted. This is now assigned plain text. This is now assigned plain text, and this is now essentially a number with our specific format. As you can see, it matches everything, and then that's plain text. Now if we go over here and hit 83 and hit process, it's going to find it. And it's going to populate it correctly. So good. So that is actually how we can go through and set formats. So what we need to do is we need to take this and add it to where we populate it. So it's update record. What we need to do is record record. So as soon as it gets done loading this up, what we need to do is take this sheet and we want to get the range, and that range is then sheet get last row, and then we're starting at the first column. We only want one row, and then we want to get to the very last column, get last column, and then we want to set the number formats to this. So now when we, first let me go down here and comment out this function. When we save this and then create a new record, you'll be able to see that it'll initially populate it. And then as it initially populates, it will then reformat it and we'll be able to use it. So let's save this, and then what we will do, I apologize, it took a long time to get over there, but here we are. What I did was I took our number format, this set number format, and brought it up here to our record data, and we want it to come in after it populates the data. So we want our data to populate, and then we want to get the last row of that sheet and then set the number formats. And I commented out our function here. So let's save this, and then we'll go back. Make sure this shares correctly. There we go. Sorry about that. I'm getting a lag. And then we'll refresh our sidebar. Now what we should be able to do is create a record, and we'll create it as, I don't know, 73. So let's do that. Let's go 73. And then our last name will be Jefferson. I'll do Jimmy. And we'll also put this person as facilities. Except this person here is going to be a, let's do welder. And we pay our welders 78. Date of hire is going to be 12/5/2024. This is also a new hire. Now what's going to happen here is when we create this record, it will come over, populate, it'll be misformatted, and then we should see that format run and essentially fix it. So let's go ahead and process it. And there you go. Now we should be able to go in here to 73, go in and retrieve our data, and there it is. Perfect. So now we have a fully functioning HR admin interface that creates, reads, updates, and deletes. So there's one last thing that I want to do, and we'll wait for the next video, and that is to create a separate view here, because if we start adding things to this UI, it's going to get pretty long, and we're going to have to scroll to get information. What I would like to do is create a simple calculator here in a separate view where an individual presses a button to either do the generalized information or runs a, say, a salary analysis or something like that, or just a simple calculator. So I hope that you found this video informative, and I hope to see you in our next video. Until then, please take care.